So you're ready to take those down-level servers in your network, such as Server 2008 or Server 2012, and upgrade them to Server 2016. How do we go about doing that? Well, there's two paths we can take here. One is known as an in-place upgrade. This is where we take that existing down-level server and just simply install Server 2016 over the top of the older operating system, essentially overwriting it. The second path we can take is known as a clean installation and a migration, where we stand up a whole new machine with Server 2016 on it, and then we take that down-level machine and migrate everything, all the applications and data off of it, to the new machine. So in this nugget, we're going to break down the differences between an in-place upgrade and a clean install plus migration, and then we're going to jump into the virtual nugget lab, and I'll get you up to speed on the tools and the process for actually performing a migration. Let's do it. Let's begin with in-place upgrades. Again, this is where we take a down-level server on the network, and we bring it up to Server 2016 by simply installing Server 2016 directly onto that machine. For example, let's say that we have an old DHCP server out there, and that DHCP server is currently running, for an operating system, Server 2012 R2. What we would do is install Server 2016 right onto that machine. That's going to take the existing Windows directory and rename it to windows.old. Then it's going to create a new Windows directory and install Server 2016 into there. And then it's going to perform some internal migration between the operating system settings and any roles and features you have on that machine. Now, 99 times out of 100, that in-place upgrade process is going to go just fine. And in that rare case that it doesn't, not a big deal, because Windows will just roll back to the previous OS. The big problem with an in-place upgrade, and why Microsoft, or anybody for that matter, doesn't recommend them, is because problems usually pop up well after the upgrade process. Maybe we had old applications and services on this machine that are no longer compatible with Server 2016. Now we're in a tough spot. And of course, that would never happen because we plan accordingly, right? We know what's on all of our machines, and we would have tested them out in another 2016 prior to doing this in-place upgrade. But the point is, there's a lot of hidden variables that can pop up, especially with hardware and software compatibility once you do an in-place upgrade. Plus, you need to be eligible to do an in-place upgrade, and there's a lot of restrictions that could prevent us from even performing one in the first place. For example, you cannot perform in-place upgrades between languages or between installation options, right? No going from core to desktop or desktop to core or nano server to anything for that matter either. We can go between editions, but only going up. In other words, from standard to data center. You cannot go backwards, say from data center to standard. And finally, the only thing we can do between versions is go from Server 2012 or Server 2012 R2 to Server 2016. If you wanted to take an old 2008 server and get it to 2016, going the in-place upgrade route, you would need to perform a double hop. You would need to first perform an in-place upgrade from 2008 to 2012 or R2, and then from there to Server 2016. Sounds like a lot of work, huh? And then you still could potentially run into those hidden variables after the fact. This is why it's highly recommended that we go the clean installation and migration path. In this path, we stand up a brand new Server 2016 machine. So a fresh machine with a fresh installation of Windows. Then we take our down-level machine, which could be 2008, 2012, heck, it could go all the way back to Server 2000 for that matter, and we just simply migrate all of the data over to that machine. Operating system settings, roles and features, shares, you name it. All that environmental data that we need and application data on that machine, we just simply move it over to the new machine. This has a number of benefits. Number one, all of these go away. We can migrate between versions, editions, installation options, even languages, even way back to older operating systems because we've taken the operating system layer right out of the picture. It's also much safer, easier to test with, and will incur less downtime. All of that because we're not dealing with a single OS. We split our OSs across machine boundaries. So we can leave our down-level server alone, we can migrate all the data off of there onto our new machine, test it out, make sure everything functions accordingly, and then flip the switch. The only downside is it requires a little more hardware, but that's a small price to pay for all the benefits we get, plus virtualization these days makes that really simple. Oh, and that's another big benefit, by the way, is this will allow us to migrate from physical machines to virtual machines and vice versa. That's pretty cool. Not something we can do with an in-place upgrade. Oh, and also across architectures. If you have a really old 32-bit server out there that you need to migrate up to 64-bit 2016, this would be the only method we could take to get there. Now, to actually perform a migration, we are going to need the Windows Server migration tools. This is a feature built into Windows. And I'm going to show you this process when we get into the virtual lab. We actually have an old Server 2012 R2 DHCP server that's handing out IP addresses to our network. We also have a clean installation of Server 2016 available to us, and our job is going to be taking that role and its data and migrating it over to 2016 and watching it serve our network with IP addresses. So the first thing you need to understand here is you have a source and a destination server. Your source is going to be your down level server. Your destination is going to be your brand new server. So our first step in the process is to install the Windows Server migration tools onto our destination server. That's going to give us access to our SMIG deploy command utility, as well as all the PowerShell commandlets that we're going to be using for importing and exporting the data. So the first order of business then, after we get those tools installed, is to run SMIG deploy on our destination to generate the distribution package for whatever down level server we're targeting. So we're going to say, okay, SMIG deploy, I am targeting a Server 2012 R2 system that's 64-bit. It's going to say, okay, here's your package. We're going to take that package and we're going to move it over to our source machine and run it. That's going to register the tools and give us access to the PowerShell commandlets over on this side. Then we're going to use the SMIG commandlets to export our settings. In our case, we're going to export the DHCP role. That's going to export all the settings and everything that we need and generate yet another package known as the migration store, just a file containing all the settings. We're then going to push that file back to our destination machine and then run an import of those settings. And the cool thing is, we're not even going to install the DHCP role onto this machine because the SMIG commandlets will do that for us. It'll install the role, import all of our data, turn it on, and then we'll be good to go. Now, Microsoft did a pretty good job of trying to standardize how migration works across all of their server roles. And understanding these tools in this process will get you a good chunk of that way. But just know that every server role is different, and that's why Microsoft does provide migration guides for all of the popular server roles out there. So keep those guides handy when it comes time to do this stuff in the real world. All right, let's jump into the virtual lab and learn how to perform a migration from a down-level Server 2012 R2 machine to our brand new clean installation of Server 2016. All right, let's set the stage for this lab. Starting with Server 2016 though, this is our brand new Server 2016 machine. There's nothing on it. I brought it up, gave it a name, added it to the network, and joined it to the domain. And by the way, its IP is 192.168.1.103. Server 2012 NUG is our DHCP server currently. So it's currently serving up IP addresses just to client NUG on the network. And its IP is .104. Client NUG is going to be our machine to test with. Again, it's currently set up for DHCP, so we'll get onto that one first just to make sure our DHCP infrastructure is working accordingly. And then we have our domain controller hosting the nuggetlab.com domain. So our goal for this lab is to migrate from our down-level source machine of Server 2012 NUG, the DHCP role, up to our brand new destination machine, Server 2016 NUG. Let's begin by hopping down to Client NUG and logging in. On Client NUG, let's bring up the command prompt here. Just right-click on that start button, head up to the command prompt here, choose yes at the user account control dialog there, and let's write an ipconfig/all. Right now, check it out. 192.168.1.120. Our DHCP server is handing out IPs in the range of .120 to .129, and we'd actually see our DHCP server right here, .1.104. So it's currently our Server 2012 NUG machine. Now let's head back up to our Server 2012 NUG machine and log in. Server Manager will launch automatically, and when it does, drop down that Tools menu, and let's launch DHCP Manager. Let's just take a look at our scope and the settings, just so we know what to expect once we migrate this role and all of its data over to our Server 2016 NUG machine. So let's expand Server 2012 NUG, expand IPv4, expand our scope. Notice we have a scope here called Workstations, and if we expand that and choose Pool, just to verify here, our pool of IP addresses that are getting handed out are from .120 to .129. We have a current lease out there for client NUG, .120. And if we head to scope options, we have two scope level options here, router and our DNS servers, and one server level option here for DNS domain name. All right, so this is all the data we're going to expect to see over there when we're done with our migration. Let's just minimize all of this. We'll come back to here in a little bit, and let's begin on our source server, which is Server 2016 NUG, and log in. On our Server 2016 NUG machine, we're going to get right into the PowerShell integrated scripting environment. We're going to do all of this through PowerShell. So let's launch File Explorer, head right into this PC, into the C drive, and in there we have a NuggetLab directory. We're going to go ahead and right-click ps-commands.ps1 and choose Edit so we can launch this script right into the integrated scripting environment. And again, the first thing we need to do on this machine is install the Windows Server migration tools. So just to show you what that looks like first, let's run a Get Windows feature with the name of migration. You can also, of course, see this through the Add Roles and Features wizard in the GUI there. But here it is, Windows Server Migration Tools. Here's the name, which is what we used. And now let's go ahead and give that an install. So we'll run that same exact command, only using an install Windows feature rather than a get. And that'll just take a second to install those tools locally. Now what that's going to do is create a directory inside of the System32 Windows directory called Server Migration Tools. In fact, we're going to need to switch locations to that directory, so you could run a set location, or cd is the alias there for set location, change directory. Let's go ahead and do that. Now we are inside of here. I'm just going to run a dir down here just to show you what's in here, and look at that. Smig deploy. That's what we want, as well as the PowerShell bits here containing all the commandlets for working with the Smig commandlets. So our next step then is to generate our package for our source machine. And that's where Smig deploy comes into play here on your destination machine. We're going to run Smig deploy, pass in the package switch, pass in our architecture. We're targeting a 64-bit machine. We're targeting Windows Server 2012 R2. So you'll pass your OS version into this parameter. Then we just need to specify the path where this package is going to live. We'll just plant that into the Nugget Lab directory on the root of the C drive. So again, here we're going to place our cursor on that line and hit run selection, and that will take just a few seconds here to generate that package, and there it is. You'll get a little message there with the output, and there it is. In fact, if we head back to our Nugget Lab directory now, there is that package. So now we need to get this package onto our down level machine, and we're going to use PowerShell for that as well. Here we're going to use the copy item commandlet, pass in our local path, and then pass in our destination path. We're going to plant this into the Nugget Lab directory over there on our Server 2012 Nug machine by going through the administrative share. So we'll place our cursor on that line, run it as well, and that'll just take a second to copy that directory and everything in it on over to Server 2012 Nug. And we're done here for now on our source machine. Next, we need to head over to our Server 2012 Nug machine and run the Smig deploy that it generated in this package to register the migration tools over there for that version of Windows. So let's head back over here to Server 2012 Nug, and let's head into File Explorer. We're going to go into the C drive, into the Nugget Lab directory, and again, I've got a PowerShell script in here as well. So let's right-click, choose Edit to launch the script into the ISC. Now, one important thing I want to point out here is that Smig deploy requires the .NET 3.5 framework, which may or may not be on your operating system. Depends on how far down level you are. Server 2012 R2 does not come with the .NET 3.5. So if you try to execute this, it's going to yell at us and say, oh, sorry, couldn't be installed. It would attempt to install it, but here's the thing. .NET 3.5 is not a part of the payload here on an installation of Windows. In fact, it's in the side-by-side directory in the source directory on the installation media. In fact, if we try to run a get Windows feature here for .Net Framework Core, this is .3.5 by the way, including .NET 2.0 and 3.0, its install state says removed, meaning it's not in the side-by-side directory here on an installation of Server 2012 R2. So this is why I mounted the Server 2012 R2 installation media to this machine so we can get it on. So we're going to run an install Windows feature, pass in Net Framework Core, and specify for the source parameter where that side-by-side directory lives, which is in the sources directory on the installation media of Server 2012 R2. And you can also do this through the wizard as well. You'll see it'll actually detect it and give you a warning, and then you can browse to it. So we're going to do this through PowerShell though. So let's run the second line of code here, install Windows feature, and that will get .NET 3.5 onto this machine. All right, now we're good to go. Now we can run smigdeploy.exe. Let's go ahead and do that. That's going to, again, register these tools locally, and it's going to pop open a PowerShell prompt that will automatically import all of the commandlets here inside of the migration module. In fact, I'm just going to close out of this because we're already in PowerShell. I'll show you how to do this manually. We're going to run add snap-in and reference that module, and that will give us access to all of the Smig commandlets. So let's go ahead and do that right now. There we go. That'll add it in here. And now if we do a get command and just pass in the module here, I'm just going to pass in migration so we don't have to type in Microsoft.windows.servermanager.migration. This will show us all of our Smig commandlets. There they are. So we can use a get Smig server feature, which we'll do here shortly, which will show us all the server roles on this machine that are eligible for migration. We're also going to be using an import and an export. So we'll export from this machine and then import over there on our destination machine. All right, so the first thing we need to do before we do anything here is stop the DHCP server service on this machine. Otherwise, these Smig commandlets will fail. So let's stop the DHCP server service by running a stop service, and this will completely shut her down. All right, there we go. Now, let's take a look here at get Smig server feature. This should show us that DHCP server is an available role that we can migrate. There it is. Perfect. So now, the next thing we need to do is just simply do an export Smig server setting. This is going to create that migration store and the file that contains all of the data that our destination server needs to get DHC up and running, and then import our scope and all of those settings that we looked at previously. So pass in the feature ID here, which is right here in the output of get Smig server feature, just DHCP, and the path. So this will create a migration directory inside of our Nugget Lab directory containing that file. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this line of code. It's going to ask for a password because it does encrypt it. So I'm just going to pass in our lab password there. Hit OK, and this will just take a second to export and create that migration store. Done. And you can actually see that if you head back into File Explorer, there's that migration directory, and there's the migration store. Just a file containing all of that DHCP goodness that we need. So the last thing we need to do then is take that file or that directory and send it over to our destination machine. So that's what this last line of code will do. It'll just copy that directory over to the Nugget Lab directory back on our Server 2016 NUG machine. So I'm going to go ahead and execute that. It's done. And now the last thing we need to do is import that into our destination machine. So let's head back over to Server 2016 NUG and scroll down a little bit here. And we need to do the same thing here. We need access to those SMIG commandlets. So we're going to run an add ps snap in here to get access to all those commandlets. Beautiful. And now we just simply need to run an import. Let's just verify that file made it over here first. We'll head back to Nugget Lab. There's migration. Beautiful. There's our migration store. So now we can run an import, SMIG server settings, specify our feature ID, specify our path to that directory. We're also going to force it here. But one thing I want to point out is that if we open up Server Manager here, notice there's no DHCP on this machine at all. Nothing. In fact, if you were to add roles and features, which you can also do here through the dashboard, and hit next a few times till you get to server roles, notice that it's not there. It's gone. So this will actually install the DHCP server role and then perform an import of all those settings. So let's place our cursor on this line and hit run. Also, don't forget to enter the password here that you entered when you ran the export SMIG server setting commandlet. And now we just need to wait a minute. And it's done. Didn't take long at all. Now, one thing that it didn't do was install the management tools. In fact, if we go back into Server Manager, let's just give this a refresh. We should now see DHCP over here on the left. There it is. But we're lacking the tools, because if you were to give this a right click, you won't see DHCP Manager in there. If we drop down Tools, we won't see DHCP Manager. We also, by the way, need to configure this, and that's pretty easy. Just drop down the notification area here, choose Complete DHCP Configuration, hit Next, and then hit Commit, because we're going to use our Domain Administrator credentials here, and that'll just finish configuration. Cool, now we're done. Now, the final thing we need to do is get those tools on here just so we can verify that all those settings made it over. So, drop down the Manage menu, choose Add Roles and Features. We'll just do this one through the GUI real quick here. Head all the way down until you get to Features. Once we hit Features, we're going to head down here to Remote Server Administration Tools. There's our RSAT tools. This is a role administration tool, and if you scroll down, you should see DHCP in the list. There it is, DHCP Server Tool. So put a check there, hit Next, and then install. All right, that's done. Let's go ahead and close out of the wizard. Now we can drop down the Tools menu, and there's DHCP Manager. All right, let's maximize this. Give ourselves a little more room to work with here. Expand Server 2016 NUG, expand IPv4. Hey, all looks good so far. There's our scope. There's our address pool, looks good. We've still got our lease in there. If we head down to scope options, we should see both our scope options, and there is our server option. So everything looks good. Let's run one final test here. Let's head back down to our client NUG machine, relog in if it logged you out there, and now let's run an ipconfig/release. This will release our DHCP lease, and then let's run an ipconfig/renew. This should communicate with our Server 2016 machine, and look at that, we just got our old lease back here. In fact, now if we run an ipconfig/all, this will verify that indeed our brand new DHCP server is .103, not .104. And if we just ping here SRV 2016 NUG just to verify that this is indeed our brand new DHCP server. And that, my friends, is the migration process. Not too bad, right? Just a lot of steps involved, but really it all comes down to the Windows Server migration tools, SMIG deploy, and those SMIG commandlets. One more thing. On our Server 2012 NUG machine, I also included in the DVD drive the Windows Server 2016 installation media. So if you feel like getting some practice in performing an in-place upgrade, relaunch the lab, drop down that DVD drop-down, choose the Windows Server 2016 installation media, and just double-click on the DVD drive, and it will launch the installation wizard. That way you can get both perspectives here and practice both an in-place upgrade plus a clean installation and migration. In this CBT Nugget, we learned how to upgrade and migrate to Windows Server 2016. We talked about the differences between an in-place upgrade and a clean installation and migration, and we actually saw how to perform a migration in the virtual lab. Good times. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.